All right, so I've noticed some Christians beginning to do what I have experienced in the past Muslims doing. I lived in France for 5 years, and in addition to reaching out to French university students, also worked with Muslims. I read the Quran a couple of times and got in a lot of discussions with them. And one of the things I would ask them, I'd say, how am I supposed to know Muhammad, who came in the 7th century, 700 years after Jesus? How would I know he's like a true prophet? Oh, and they would open the Quran and point to the verse and says, and where Muhammad says, here's how you can know that my revelations are true, because they're in line with previous revelation. Jews, go read Moses. Christians, go read the Gospels, and you'll see everything I'm saying is in line with what they said. And I say, well, I've read the Quran, and I've read the Gospels, and I've read, and the Gospels and, Moses and Jesus seem to be on the same team, but there's a lot of contradictions, actually, with what Muhammad is saying. And they'd say, but that's because Jews and Christians have corrupted their scriptures, and they're no longer pure. I'm like, well, how can I know what parts of Moses' writings and what parts of the Gospels are genuine? Use the filter of the Quran. Well, you're beginning to see that this is like circular logic taken to unprecedented levels. So I'm supposed to know that the Quran is true because it's in line with previous revelation, but when it's not in line with previous revelation, it's because that's an error and I use the Quran to correct it. Okay, that seems like philosophically shaky ground, but I've seen Christians saying very similar things lately, online at least, if maybe not behind their pulpits, about the Old Testament. Guys, how do we know that Jesus is the promised Messiah and not a false Messiah? Because what he did and what he said was perfectly in line with Moses and the prophets. This is what St. Paul said. This is what St. Paul said, that Jesus died according to the scriptures, that he was raised again according to the scriptures. This is what St. John says at the beginning of his gospel. Come and see the one that Moses and the prophets talked about. When Jesus rose from the dead, he opened people's minds to understand the scriptures, to see that everything he did and said was a fulfillment of all of this, that he was the perfect continuity between all the various writings of the Hebrew scriptures, and he fulfilled them to a T. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Not a jot and tittle of the law. I have not come to get rid of the law and the prophets. No, but to fulfill. And yet some Christians, when they struggle to understand the Old Testament, instead of digging down deep and thinking, all right, maybe I don't understand Jesus very well. Maybe I don't understand his character very well. Maybe I don't know God very well. Maybe I don't know the Old Testament very well. Instead of doing that and thinking, well, maybe my ideas about Jesus are more formed by popular culture and popular values than the scriptures, what they do is saying, well, that was just the Old Testament. I have Jesus. And so I can disregard all this stuff in the Old Testament that doesn't look like Jesus. Jesus is perfect theology, but, some of the Old Testament things, some of those prophets, some of those Moses, maybe not so much. I have to filter it through Jesus. But what you end up doing then is having a cultural idea of Jesus instead of Jesus formed by the scriptures. And that's dangerous. You end up with an idol, and instead of worshiping the true Jesus, it's a pop Jesus, a cool Jesus, a Jesus that, would get along with, big corporations and Hollywood and movie stars. And, he would just sort of be loved by anyone instead of someone that would be, liked and approved of and perfectly in line with everything that the Old Testament talks about. So if you think you see a contradiction between Jesus and the Old Testament scriptures, dig a little deeper. Maybe you don't fully understand what one or both are really all about.